Thanks for joining us. My name's John Sintras, and I work with Mutinex, which is all about bringing growth insights to marketers in seconds. So I'm particularly interested in this subject and the power of data-driven thinking, and it's a pleasure to be moderating the panel here today with Tommaso and Seth. Did you guys just want a quick introduction on yourselves?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm Tommaso. Been working at Pharmavite for the past 4 years. Pharmavite is a vitamin and supplement company. I lead consumer research, which is a mix of marketing analytics and primary research, consumer insights, as well as brand activation, which is media and creative. So really excited to be here.
Seth, Duncan. I'm the Chief Science Officer at Lippe Taylor. Lippe Taylor is a comms and marketing agency primarily working in the health and wellness space. We take a earn-first approach to marketing, meaning we like to have our customers and the media kind of tell stories about our brands based on cultural zeitgeist, and then we kind of surround that with paid media and more traditional marketing techniques. I'm responsible for all things innovation, so that includes brand strategy, analytics, our emerging tech stack, and the broad application of AI across the company.
Awesome, thank you guys. Okay, well let's jump right in with the subject that's been recurring over the last few days. But in your experience, what's the biggest change you've seen over the last few years in the way that you are leveraging data and driving better insight for marketing growth and performance?
I think like in the past years, what I observed from different techniques and what I really like is the ability to observe consumers in real time at the moment when they're performing or where they're consuming, in my case, vitamins, versus asking questions post, like after. So really, ability to observe in real time using AI, using smart home devices, social listening. Mm-hmm. So these observational methods are really key, and I'm seeing like a lot of them increasing over the past years, and a bit less reliant on traditional surveys and claim data, which we know past behavior is more predictive of future behavior than claimed and attitudes.
Yeah, I'll give a really dry answer because I like to get into data science in cases like this. But this sounds really lame, but I would say the broad availability of third-party consumer data that you could combine with the CDP. We were just talking about CDPs in the previous panel. So, basically being able to get like household or ID level information about, and anonymized, about people's spend, their demographics, where they live, what media they're consuming, hundreds of thousands of attributes about all of us, anonymized, but you can tokenize it and connect it with other data sets. That's really game-changing, and it's much cheaper than it was even 5-10 years ago. And then I would also say, these are massive data sets. The ability to, let me just say this, like the ease and relatively low cost of data storage and compute is really different now. I mean, compared to like 5 years ago. So our ability to actually really understand massive populations, segment them horizontally, really reach them in a way that they want to be reached and be relevant to them is completely transformed recently.
So when you're thinking about what separates great companies from average companies in terms of how they use science, data science and tech, what do you think the key things that elevate are?
I think there are two things. One that hasn't changed, especially in research, which is the ability to answer direct business question, like link the research to your business strategy. A lot of things, and especially one of the risks with big data is then we produce data for data's sake, and it's not linked like to answering questions like what's ultimately the business strategy. So really like what separates a great company using research and one that just produces research is link it to your strategy. And the other thing, which is more recent, building on CDP, is actually I've seen like, and we are doing that part in investing in first-party data. Like most of the companies, they all have like, especially big CPGs, they have contracts with data panels, but it's third-party data that everybody has access to it. Retailers who we sell to, they actually have better data than CPG because they have primary like shopper data. So to compete in this environment, company needs to invest by using their website into first-party data and like really showing that they understand their consumer better than retailers, better their competitors. So the combination of two things is really like what I think really separates companies really using data versus companies that claim to use data.
Okay, thank you, Seth.
Totally agree. I wish I could add to that. I would say your ability to actually own your own data is crucial. And even if you are in CPG, just clawing your best at getting as much data on your customers as possible. Because if you don't own your data, and Amazon or some retailer does, like your DOA. And then I think the other one is it's financial investment. I mean, making real capital investment in the types of technologies that allow you to connect your first-party data, third-party data to all the media technology that you have, either your partners have or you have in-house. These are massive investments that companies make, but I work a lot in pharma. The couple of big pharma companies that have done this, I mean, contrary to, well, I don't want to, somebody just said in the previous panel, the omni-channel's dead. I tend to disagree, especially in B2B settings. Omni-channel absolutely works if there's massive capital investment to build the architecture to do it well internally. So money and data. Yeah.
Okay. I know a few of the panels have been talking about what's next, but if you think about how science is evolving, are there things that are on the horizon that you guys have seen that you're, obviously everyone's talking about AI and the application of that to everything that we're doing. From your perspective, what's coming and what are you excited about?
I think there are like different things. One that is not necessarily linked to AI, but I've seen in the past, especially since I started my career in consumer research, and what I'm seeing now is really the integration of more aspects, more disciplines into what's traditional market research. So I've been super excited to see like psychology integrated with all the behavioral science and Kahneman, and how actually like you integrate from macro models to more like micro, and how consumers make decisions. So all that integration has led to a lot of revolutions in market research, shopper psychology, how you shelve like different products on a planogram, really thinking it's not necessarily just regressions and models, but also like people can be skewed by colors, by several aspects that are really happening more from a psychological level. And that's one of the revolutions that has started, and I'm still seeing like a lot of potential right now. The other thing is definitely big data. It's definitely like now we have like access to big data, we have access to AI, which can help us like socialize and can help us also like summarize all this data. But I still feel it goes back to human talent, in the sense if you don't ask the right question, if you don't ask the right prompts, there's no need. Like if you ask me, do you need more data? I'm always, no, I have enough data. I need good people to analyze the data. And that doesn't change. If anything, becomes more important right now when you have like different data sets to decide which one to buy. And ultimately goes back to what's the business question you're trying to address.
Cool.
It's hard to pick one or two. I could probably talk for about 5 hours or maybe 5 days on this topic. So I'll keep it short for all of you. I would say one big thing I'm really excited about, it is AI related, but it's actually more around computer vision and some of the abilities to actually extract variables or data from unstructured sources. So, throughout this, when we talked about measurement, I think throughout this entire kind of week, there's a real focus on reach and frequency. Basically, how many people saw your ad, how frequently do they see it? But what's often missing from, certainly as a creative agency, or if you are a brand director, you want to know like, well, what's working and not working within those ads? What content's working? And what's working for our competitors too. And that's the thing. A lot of our clients, we know what the competitor sales look like. So being able to actually extract dimensions from the imagery using ResNet or some of the commercially available Google Vision. So, sorry, this is not a technical audience. ResNet's a very cool neural network thing that's about 10 years old that is now more commercially useful. But being able to extract things like, is Red Bull posting ads where like their athletes are sponsoring, there's like a risk of death. Like being able to extract dimensions like that from advertisements at scale is now, I think, increasingly possible. So that's very cool. Not just like, oh, this person's wearing a green shirt or something like that. Like real semantic meaning from the ads. And being able to include that in things like, as a predictive measure for sales. I think the other one is, and this is a little bit strange, but it's kind of like an economic kind of an economic, I don't know what to call it, like artifact. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but in the last like 5 years, really since 2020, there's been a lot of tech layoffs. So I don't know if you remember, getting data science talent used to be really hard. But now there is literally thousands of ex-Facebook and Google and Apple engineers that contract at, relatively low rates. So, you can develop incredible software now that just wasn't feasible for a lot of companies, just internal software, just to sort of scale your analytics and research practices. So I think the other thing I'm excited about is, and we're certainly doing this at Lippe Taylor, is taking our best methodologies, getting it into software so that the end users can do it. You don't need kind of like this I shouldn't say nonsense, but like wonky help desk kind of thing. It's like, I'd like to get some insights from this team, and submitting a help ticket, and then some data scientist that you've never met's doing something like that. I think that's going to end soon. And really, like, the strategists, the creatives will have more direct access to, able to do these sorts of analyses themselves.
Okay, cool. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about your business, Pharmavite, Tommaso. You've been there 3 or so years, I think you told me earlier. 3 years feels like a long time in the industry that we're operating in right now. What's changed? Like, what's the application of data been in your business over that 3-year period? How different is it?
I'd say like building on like the impact of psychology. When I came over like in the business, if you look at our advertising, Nature Made, the #1 brand like in vitamin in the US, our advertising at the time 3 years ago was very functional. That was the way, like in VMS, part of OTC, over the counter, and drugs and pharma. So you had a pharmacist telling you what to buy and like telling you the health benefit of buying the vitamins. So that was pretty much the standard in advertising. We realized by doing some research that these assets were actually like being diluted across like different competitors using them. So there was very little brand recognition. There was a risk in continuing doing so. We used psychology at the time to understand a bit better when consumers think of vitamins, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And we went back to their first imprint, the first memory of taking vitamins. So we did research. It was at night. We had consumers like sleeping, then waking them up, scribbling on a paper. There's a whole research method to do that. It's called elicitation, and asking them, okay, what's the first memory? We collected from this like large number of diaries, and the first memory that came out, there was no mention of health, no mention of doctors. It was my mother, when I was a kid, in the kitchen, giving me like these Flintstone vitamins, and I felt very safe. I felt carefree, and all of that. So that has unlocked let's switch like our advertising in from a very functional kind of like scaremongering approach to a much more recreating this feeling of this ritualistic aspect, this maternal, this safety. So if you look at our new advertising, you can really see like how we bring to life this idea of like the kitchen, the ritual, the mother, the family, and it's unlocked. Like then we have like result sales lift showing that it actually is driving sales. So like psychology is not just a way to make nice creative, it's also like a way to actually sell, even if you don't have like a very salesy approach in your ad, like buy this now, because otherwise you're gonna get sick.
I love that. And I think that's a really important point. We're all obsessed with data and making sure we get the best out of AI or whatever, but we also got to think about the human side of things. And I think one of the big unlocks with increased productivity and data is that it allows us to think more and to sort of activate the right side of the brain. So that's a really cool and important point. Do you have what is the balance between, data science and humanity, if you like? Do you have a point of view on how to make sure you're getting the right blend of left and right brain sort of approaches?
It's, I think, like especially in advertising, which is the area that I'm really passionate about, you need to have a mix. Like there's different recipes in academia, or like, but I find like a mix is between, you need to go back, what's the first, like what's your reptilian brain, like telling you what's the right brain, that's gonna be like the first hook, the reason why you pay attention, like intentionally or not intentionally. But then you have a close, you have like also to engage with the other side of the brain, like why I should buy this. So again, I go back to my advertising. you have the family, you have everything, but then the close is a claim, which is about like giving you confidence that you're making like the right choice. Number one, pharmacist recommended. So there's still that part, but it's not like the main part. So I'd say like it's a good mix. You lead with the hook, which is your reptilian brain, your right brain, but you close with a strong claim once you get like the consumer attention.
Seth, I'm sure you got a point of view.
On the balance between sort of the humanity of marketing and data science, well, I think they both serve each other. Certainly when, I think that obviously like insights around, for example, having the diary sort of example that was just provided. I mean, that is a form of data science. I mean, getting that, you have to do the research somehow. And I think that the only thing that data science, I think the way that we think of it, which is like large data sets, AI, et cetera, they're performing the same role that psychological research has done in advertising since the 20s, since behaviorists really kind of got into advertising. It's just that it's faster, it's more behavioral based, and it's more scalable. I mean, it's essentially more people can do it. You don't have to have a PhD in behavioral psychology like, James Watson did in the 20s when he started going into advertising. You can, creatives and strategists can do more of that themselves. So I actually, I don't know, I guess I don't necessarily see the distinction as much. I do think that, I will say that kind of in an increasingly kind of, I forget the phrase that was used in the previous panel, but in an increasingly kind of fractionalized media ecosystem, there has been such a focus on targeting and performance marketing that I do think brand building has kind of suffered a little bit, and it's very hard to do that when you're like, well, our audiences, they're only listening to podcasts, we're just going to focus there. I mean, it's really hard to reach everybody with the same message and the same types of brand identities at the same time. So I think that there's challenges there from a marketing perspective, but maybe not so much from a data science one.
Fair enough. Well, I think on the full funnel brand versus performance marketing stuff, certainly our huge database of client data is showing the problem with underinvesting in performance. It really proves out that the ROI is not there if you're not filling the top of the funnel. It sounds obvious, but there's been a huge pivot to performance because it's more measurable, and I think we're starting to now have ways to prove that that's not the best way to drive ROI. So that's really critical. Trust is really important for many categories, but particularly important for your category where you're, looking to improve your health and ingesting vitamins and stuff. How does science help with trust? I mean, you've talked about emotion and sort of the reptilian brain, but how important is sort of scientific evidence in your comms?
Especially in vitamins, when you have like proliferation of brands, like on Amazon, you can find pretty much every new supplements. It's very important to have like scientific rigor and evidence, and like Pharmavite has been built and founded by a pharmacist, so there's a whole scientific department like researching. We don't launch products unless there has been like a number of clinical trials, and that's not gonna change. Like that's like still the fundamental, regardless of like how science is, like how we use science then in advertising. Is it a pharmacist? No longer, but still the foundational behind the product innovation is there. What has changed, and the new approach to science and building trust, is consumers are not necessarily relying on a white coat or a doctor telling you, take this. That's not the way to bring science to life, but what they're asking today is, help me understand a bit better how these different ingredients build or lead to several benefits. So for instance, in the past, if we had 5 ingredients, we could list like 2 benefits and assume that's pretty much. Now I have consumer like replying or telling me, if you have 5 ingredients, tell me exactly how these 5 are, like why don't I have 5 benefits? So that's really like this level of education that we are asked like to bring to life. And that's not necessarily the biggest splashy TV advertising. It's more when it comes like to social media, retailer media, like that part where product information is more relevant. But also like in store, like displays where like we build the product information. So it's a different approach to science where it's more like about ingredient traceability, purity of ingredients versus like the reference to seals of legitimacy or white coats, how we build trust today with consumers.
Awesome, thank you. So, on the point of trust, let's pivot to trust in marketing and trust in the value of marketing, which is my particular obsession. I've always, been frustrated that we can't walk into a boardroom and prove to our C-suite that this is exactly the value we derive. We contribute to the top line and ultimately the bottom line. But fortunately, with the advent of technology today and platforms like ours, we are finally able to do that. So I'm just curious, how are you thinking about effectiveness and building trust in the marketing function at Pharmavite with your stakeholders?
I think there are different frameworks where you can, ultimately, the C-suite, my board is asked to reconduct every metric that I'm using to revenues and profit. So ultimately what my exercise is really showing how more marketing metrics brand equity, penetration, how many consumers are funneling into revenues and profit. But I think of that as a house, or the roof of the house is your revenues and your sales, and that's what I brought to life to the board. And then you have different activities that link to that, like the home market is brand equity. And there are models that can connect how the brand equity or the mental availability leads up to revenues. In my category, vitamins, we have really seen this correlation between the two, where brand equity can be determined when we stopped advertising, when we reduce, and there are months when we reduce advertising, you can see the direct impact on revenues and sales. That's the key metric that I'm using. ROI, I'm using a lot of that on sales lift. It's a more short-term oriented. So I use a combination of that, mostly to report on channel-specific performance, but I'm also cautious in using too much of ROI and that performance marketing approach to my board, because that's also key decision that it usually take is overinvest in channels which have short-term effect. And TV, for instance, linear TV, and my audience is very old. Vitamin and supplement, the key audience is older. So linear TV is still a thing where we invest, but it's also a thing that is always on. So the ROI is very hard to pick, in any model, when you have an always on metric, it's very hard to pick drops and hence have a strong. So if I just look at MMM and all of that, it would tell me invest in digital, invest in retail media and all of that. But I know that's where I look at brand awareness and equity. That's not necessarily the right thing. So long story short, there are different metrics that you need but I'm really a fan of using brand awareness for a total reporting and linking that to how it builds sales.
Okay, cool. Seth, any comments on effectiveness from your end?
Related to trust, I would say I have the advantage of being at an agency where usually an RFP is already issued and the decision's been made by the time I'm involved. So I'm usually not the one selling the value of marketing as much as maybe my colleagues on the client side. I would say that one of the things that can be challenging for some companies is actually selling the importance of something like trust and building that kind of brand trust with customers. Because performance marketing has been, especially for smaller startups, it has all been about lead generation, sales, and the focus isn't always on long-term customer equity. So I think that can kind of be a challenge. But again, there's so many, honestly, there's so many great case studies out there. If you basically kind of show how others in the same industry have done it, it's going to work. There's a lot of vertical specificity in this as well, obviously. What's important in kind of health and wellness and in nutritionals is going to be very different than consumer electronics and even pharma and so on. But yeah.
Cool. Well, let's finish. We're drawing to a close, so let's finish with a question that many people have been talking about. So AI, LLMs, etc. Are you activating that in your business, Tommaso? What's exciting about that for you?
There's definitely a lot of application from interpretive AI, which we've been doing for a long time, social listening, to more the generative AI and the ability to use different ways to actually produce advertising. That said, the approach that we're using at Pharmavite, and also was recently in another in a panel where we would have discussed like AI from other CPG, and it seems to be like most CPG are doing this. It's like piloting and identifying the key business question first of all. So like the key was really separate between just using AI for AI's sake, but actually go back to your business question and then identify, okay, there seems to be this can be solved through an AI application. In our case, like we identified like 3 key work streams where AI could have a role, and that are really challenging business questions. One is related to forecasting, so it's about like setting up like data science, a data lake, and really putting all together and using AI to actually predict future sales from past sales. Another is more in my camp, like the advertising part of it, and using generative AI to actually see, especially for lower risk assets, how we can use that and what's the perception on consumers and the use of deep fakes. And then like we are using also AI on, it's like a boosted social listening to understand more what's the trend on certain ingredients and what's the forecast on that. So it uses social listening and then like a model, an AI model to predict based on the past how a certain ingredient is going to perform in the future. So there are different pilots. I would say like the learning from me is link it back to the business question and showcase the proof before like making like a huge investment in data, in people, in capability, just build the proof of concept.
Okay. Cool. Seth?
Yeah, we're using it Lippe Taylor in 3 ways, and I'll go from like the least exciting to the most exciting. It'll be quick. Obviously, we're using it for a lot for contract. We do a lot of influencer work, for example, and we've developed a lot of AI models that actually will help us not just identify the right influencers used for brands, but also help us with the contracting with the influencer. So actually figuring out, kind of in those contracts, like what needs to be changed for our clients and what's standardized and what gets approval from legal and so on. So that's actually, it sounds very unsexy, but it actually really speeds things up when you're trying to do campaigns quickly. The other is in our marketing mix modeling, a lot of the type of like forecasting that we do, it used to take weeks sometimes for a statistician to organize the data, run, usually it's more sophisticated than regression, but something like regression analyses. For those of you that have used ChatGPT, like ChatGPT's, there's so many so many message boards with all these sorts of stats that ChatGPT has been trained on. It's very good at writing that code in R or Python or whatever for you, right? So you don't really need these giant teams of statisticians anymore. You don't need weeks. It's like sometimes hours to run the models, which is really exciting. And then I think the most interesting way is actually, and this is not recreating the wheel, but generative AI has actually helped us a lot with our clients getting ads out the door much faster. I don't know if any of you saw the Cetaphil Game Time Globe ad that they ran. Essentially, it was sort of a cultural zeitgeist moment. It's based on kind of the Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift kind of romance, and increasingly we were seeing like daughters and fathers were watching a lot of NFL together, and so Cetaphil, we decided to kind of jump on that with Cetaphil, and we developed that. We had 2 weeks basically to get an ad out the door. And Cetaphil is owned by a pharma company, so heavily regulated, a lot of legal review. So what we did is we actually we basically storyboarded the entire thing using generative AI. So we're like, this is exactly what the dad's gonna look like, this is what the daughter's gonna look like, this is what the living room's gonna look like, this is what they're gonna say. And it allowed us, what usually would take a month to get legal approval for was in a matter of days. So we actually got a legit, amazing Super Bowl ad out the door from like literally conception to in the media in 2 weeks. And that would not be possible without generative AI. Doing like illustrations and things like that, it does not convince the legal teams in pharma. So that one's very exciting.
Well, we've managed to use up our time pretty effectively. Right, 30 minutes goes fast. Thank you for sharing your insights and your experience with us today. Hopefully the audience has found that useful. And we'll leave you to the next panel. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.